Italy, 1943. The war had reached even the quietest corners of the countryside. The hills around the small village of Montelupo shimmered in the summer heat, the olive trees whispering in the dry wind. 11-year-old Eugene Buzz Corey had grown used to the sound of distant gunfire, to the rumble of tanks echoing through the valleys. But on that fateful morning, the sound changed. Deep, closer, filled with a terrifying urgency. A plane spiraled downward, trailing smoke, its engine screaming, twisting violently before vanishing into the forest beyond the vineyards. Buzz could see the metal glinting one last time before it crashed. The villagers froze, faces pale, unsure whether to flee or pray. Buzz didn't hesitate. He looked to his father, who gave a single tense nod. Without waiting, the boy and his father sprinted toward the crash, their feet pounding against the dusty ground, heartbeats echoing in time with the distant rumble of armored vehicles. The wreckage smoldered among the pines, black smoke curling into the Italian sky, carrying with it the bitter stench of burning oil and torn metal. 3 men stumbled out, not Germans, but Americans, their uniforms scorched and torn, faces streaked with soot and blood. One of them clutched his leg, wincing in pain, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Buzz had never seen an American before, only heard rumors and hushed stories whispered among the villagers. Brave men fighting far away in lands he had only imagined from the papers smuggled in by traveling priests. His father placed a trembling hand on Buzz's shoulder, whispering urgently in Italian, signaling for absolute silence. The Germans would surely come, their trucks already drumming over distant roads. Buzz's stomach tightened. Without another word, father and son worked together, carefully dragging the injured men into a wooden cart and covering them with sacks of hay. The smell of smoke and oil burned Buzz's lungs as they rolled the cart toward their small farmhouse at the edge of the village, each creak of the wooden wheels threatening to betray their precious cargo. By the time they reached the farmhouse, sweat streamed down Buzz's face, mixing with the dust and grime of the road. The barn door creaked as they slipped inside, hiding the Americans beneath a stack of hay and farming tools. Buzz knelt beside the nearest man, feeling the warmth of his trembling hand and the quick, shallow breaths that spoke of pain and fear. He whispered in a low voice, teaching the men a few Italian words, showing them how to stay silent, how to avoid the shadows that might give them away. Hours passed like days. Outside, the village seemed still, almost holding its breath. Buzz peeked through a crack in the wooden slats, his eyes scanning for movement. Every sound, the distant barking of a dog, the clatter of a loose shutter in the wind, the far-off thrum of a truck, sent a jolt of panic through him. But he stayed calm. He had learned early that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The following days were tense and relentless. Buzz brought food and water under the cover of darkness, slipping quietly between the rows of olive trees, avoiding any patrols that roamed the area. He memorized every path, every shadow, every creak in the farmhouse floorboards, knowing that a single mistake could mean death, not just for him, but for the 3 men he had sworn to protect. Jack, William, and Tom, the Americans, looked to him with a mixture of gratitude and awe, often asking in whispered tones how someone so small could hold so much bravery. Buzz never answered with words. His actions spoke louder. He carried bread from hidden cellars, filtered water from the village well, and even soothed the men's fears with quiet stories of Montelupo, painting pictures of olive groves and mountain streams that seemed to exist only in his imagination. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Buzz would sit by the barn, listening to the soft groans of the men and the distant hum of war, knowing that the smallest moments could change the course of their survival. Buzz also began noticing patterns in the German patrols, the times they left, the routes they preferred, the way they questioned villagers. Every detail became a vital piece of the survival puzzle. Once, when a patrol came unannounced, Buzz had to hide all 3 men in the loft above the barn, holding his breath as the soldiers' boots scraped across the floor below. He could hear them muttering, calling out to each other, their voices harsh and commanding. Yet somehow, miraculously, they passed without seeing anything. That night, Buzz lay awake beside the American pilots, his small hands gripping the edge of the haystack, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on him. Every decision he made, every quiet step he took, carried life-or-death consequences. And still, he pressed on, guided by an unwavering resolve that had matured far beyond his 11 years. For the next several days, the Corries lived in constant fear, each dawn bringing new tension and every dusk a fragile relief. The Americans were hidden in the family's barn, tucked beneath a pile of coarse sacks, old tools, and stacks of firewood. Buzz moved like a shadow through the farmhouse, bringing bread, water, and whatever small comforts he could muster, always under the cover of night. His small footsteps were muffled by the dirt floor. Every creak of the wooden boards, a potential alarm. He memorized every detail of the barn, the loose plank near the loft, the way the roof rattled in the wind, the smell of hay mixed with oil and dust. He had learned the names of the 3 pilots, Jack, William, and Tom, and each whispered greeting carried weight. They thanked him in broken Italian, sometimes offering him a shaky smile, and taught him English words he repeated quietly to himself, savoring the connection to the outside world, to a life beyond war and fear. Despite the constant fear, Buzz felt a growing sense of pride. He was part of something larger than himself, something meaningful. The responsibility pressed on his small shoulders like a weight he could not set down, but it also gave him purpose. Each day he watched the village, noting the pattern of German patrols, counting the trucks that rumbled past, observing the glint of helmets in the sun. One wrong word, one misstep, and not only his life, but the lives of the 3 men he protected would be at stake. He moved silently through the shadows, carrying food in small baskets, whispering encouragement to the men as he set the provisions down. Jack, wounded and grim-faced, would sometimes attempt a joke, and Buzz, despite the tension, would allow a brief smile to flicker across his face. It was small moments like this, fragile and fleeting, that reminded him he was still a child. Even in the midst of danger, on the 7th night, the tension peaked. Buzz could hear the rhythmic thud of boots against the road outside. A patrol was approaching, moving faster than usual, voices sharp with commands. His father extinguished the lamp, casting the barn into near darkness, and motioned for complete silence. The soldiers stopped at their gate, shouting in harsh, guttural German, their voices carrying across the night like an ominous drumbeat. Buzz's heart raced violently, each beat loud enough that he feared the Germans could hear it. Then came the creak of a door, the barn door. A flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping dangerously close to the hay, where the Americans lay hidden. Buzz froze, his body stiff, eyes wide with fear, every nerve alert. The officer muttered something under his breath, paused, and then turned away, as if unsure of what he had seen. Buzz let out a trembling breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Moments later, the echo of boots faded into the distance, leaving an eerie, fragile silence. Buzz collapsed into his father's arms, trembling yet alive, the tension draining slowly from his small body. Relief mingled with fear, for they both knew this night was only a reminder of the danger pressing ever closer. The German search was tightening, and the Corys could not remain safe for long. The barn, once a refuge, now felt like a fragile bubble ready to burst. Buzz's father spoke in hushed tones, outlining plans for what would come next. The need to move the pilots to a safer location, beyond the village, perhaps to partisan hands in the mountains. Buzz listened intently, the gravity of the mission pressing on him. Yet a determined spark burned in his eyes. He knew the risks, understood the cost of a single mistake, but he also understood that courage meant moving forward despite that fear. In the following nights, Buzz refined his routines, learning to anticipate the patrol's movements, memorizing every route, every shortcut, and every hidden nook in and around the barn. He spoke softly to the Americans, teaching them when to remain still, when to breathe quietly, and when to trust the shadows to conceal them. Even when the wind rattled the shutters or the old roof groaned under the weight of the night, Buzz remained calm, instilling quiet reassurance. Every successful night bolstered his confidence, but also reminded him of the razor-thin line between survival and disaster. He was no longer just a boy fetching food. He was a guardian, a strategist, and the invisible thread holding 3 lives together against a ruthless and ever-watchful enemy. Each day, he became more aware of the fragility of life, the preciousness of courage, and the quiet heroism that could shine from the smallest of hands. At dawn, they made their decision. The pilots would have to leave tonight. The Corys knew that staying any longer in the village was a risk too great. German patrols were increasing, and the hunter's net was slowly closing around Montelupo. The only hope was to guide the men through the twisting mountain trails to reach the partisan fighters hidden deep in the forests beyond the river. The path was treacherous, nearly 20 kilometers of rocky slopes, icy streams, and dense undergrowth, and a single misstep could mean capture or death. Buzz, though only 11, insisted on going with them. His father tried to refuse, shaking his head with worry, but Buzz would not be persuaded. He had explored these trails countless times, memorized every landmark, every bend, every hidden nook. At sunset, with the moon rising pale and cold over the hills, they slipped silently from the farmhouse. Buzz led the way, moving with the quiet certainty of someone far older than his years, stepping carefully over stones and fallen branches as if he were one with the night itself. The journey was brutal, testing body and spirit alike. They crossed icy streams, where water seeped into their clothes and chilled them to the bone. The rocky slopes tore at shoes and scraped knees and hands, and the Americans stumbled behind, slowed by injuries sustained in the crash. Buzz whispered encouragement constantly, waving them forward whenever distant shouts echoed through the valleys, sending chills down their spines. Twice, they were forced to drop into hidden ditches as German trucks rumbled past on roads far below, headlights briefly illuminating the shadows where they crouched. Buzz's small size made him nearly invisible in the brush, and his courage made him unstoppable. He moved as if part of the forest itself, alert to every sound, every movement, every whisper of the wind. At one point, when the youngest pilot fell, exhausted and unable to rise, Buzz pulled him up with astonishing strength, whispering in Italian, "Forza, we must keep moving." The man nodded, pale and ragged, his breaths coming in shuddering gasps. Buzz's resolve never wavered. Each step carried the weight of 3 lives in his small hands. Hours passed under the cloak of darkness, and fatigue began to press upon them like a physical weight. Buzz encouraged the Americans in soft whispers, recounting small stories of Montelupo's hills, the olive groves, the streams he knew so well, just to keep their minds off the pain and the fear. The darkness seemed endless, a world where every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant hum of a truck engine, was a potential threat. Buzz memorized each step, knowing that the paths could betray them if not followed exactly. He paused briefly when he saw glimmers of moonlight reflecting off metal helmets in the distance, holding his breath, willing his small companions to do the same. They moved like ghosts, shadows slipping between shadows, hearts pounding but feet relentless. Each creak, each slip of a foot, each whispered command was magnified by the stakes surrounding them. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the forests in pale silver and gold, they reached a clearing. Armed men, partisans who had been waiting anxiously, emerged from the trees. Relief washed over Buzz like a tidal wave, though exhaustion made his legs tremble. The Americans collapsed onto the soft grass, their expressions a mixture of awe, gratitude, and disbelief that they had survived. Buzz felt a small, quiet triumph swell in his chest. It had not been just the American survival. It had been the planning, the courage, the small decisions and careful observations that had carried them through the night. His father finally joined them, relief etched deeply into his face, clapping Buzz on the shoulder with pride and astonishment. The partisans led the men further into the forest, away from the village, and Buzz knew that at last their immediate danger had passed. Yet even in that fleeting relief, he understood that the war was far from over, that courage must continue to meet each new dawn. Buzz returned to the village a hero in secret. No one could openly celebrate, for the eyes of the enemy were everywhere, but the Corys shared a quiet pride. Buzz had walked mountains under starlight, guided men to safety, and faced danger beyond his years. Each night, he replayed the journey in his mind. The icy streams, the rocky slopes, the ditches where they hid from patrolling trucks, and realized that bravery was not measured in size or age, but in action. The memory of fear, tempered by courage, had become a permanent companion, and the lessons of that night of survival, strategy, and loyalty would shape him forever. He had not only saved lives, but had proven that even the smallest among them could outsmart an enemy, navigate impossible terrain, and endure when others might have faltered. It was a story of courage whispered in the hills, a story that would survive long after the war ended. At dawn, they reached a clearing where armed men waited, the partisans, tense and alert, scanning the trees for any hint of danger. The Americans stumbled forward, their injuries evident, but their relief was overwhelming. Buzz's small chest heaved from exhaustion, every muscle screaming from the night-long trek, yet a sense of triumph lifted him higher than fatigue could weigh him down. The partisans quickly assessed the men, giving them food, water, and directions on how to reach Allied lines safely. Buzz and his father stayed hidden at the edge of the clearing, watching silently as the soldiers disappeared into the misty forest, each step carrying them further from danger. For the first time in weeks, Buzz felt the weight of fear, of constant tension, of the looming presence of German patrols lift from his chest, leaving only a quiet, powerful satisfaction. He had done it. A child, barely 11, had guided 3 men through hostile territory and survived, outsmarting the enemy at every turn. Buzz's father placed a firm, trembling hand on his son's shoulder, pride shining through his tired, weathered eyes. "You've done well, ragazzo," he whispered, the Italian words carrying a warmth and reverence that Buzz had never felt before. They returned home slowly, each step along the familiar hills and olive groves, a reminder of the dangers they had faced, and yet, now, a testament to their resilience. The villagers remained unaware of their nighttime heroics. The secret was shared only with the hills, the forests, and the olive trees that had hidden them from the eyes of the German patrols. Buzz's mind replayed the journey in vivid detail. The icy streams that chilled him to the bone, the rocky slopes that tore at his hands, the narrow paths through the undergrowth where even adults would have faltered. Every fear, every danger had been real, and yet each step had been necessary, each moment a test of courage that he had passed. Years later, when the war finally ended, the story of Eugene "Buzz" Corey reached far beyond the quiet village of Montelupo. The American pilots, Jack, William, and Tom, returned home safely, carrying with them the memory of the young Italian boy who had saved their lives at great personal risk. They told friends, families, and fellow veterans of the brave child who had led them through the night, guided by knowledge, instinct, and a courage far beyond his years. Buzz grew up in a world still shaped by the echoes of war, but he never forgot that summer. He remembered the smell of smoke from the downed plane, the whisper of danger in the forest, the shivering, exhausted faces of the men he had guided. Each recollection reminded him not of glory, but of duty, of the moral imperative to act, even when the consequences were unknown and the risks deadly. To Buzz, the summer of 1943 was not about medals or recognition. It was about survival, morality, and the quiet triumphs of doing what was right. His story became a symbol of quiet heroism, whispered among villagers, shared in letters, and later recounted by the pilots themselves. It demonstrated that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes it is the smallest hands, the youngest hearts, that make the most profound impact. Buzz had navigated danger, protected lives, and outsmarted enemies without fanfare or expectation of reward. The legacy of his bravery endured, teaching future generations that heroism is not defined by size, age, or rank, but by the willingness to act when others cannot or will not. Even in a world torn apart by war, one child had proven that courage could shine brighter than fear, and that hope could survive in the most unlikely of places.